Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
The following program is a production of Chilling Entertainment and the creative team at Chilling Tales for Dark Nights and a proud member of the Simply Scary Podcast Network. Visit simplyscarypodcast.com to learn more about this and our other weekly storytelling programs and become a patron today to show your support and get instant access to our extensive archive of downloadable tales of terror. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show. Disclaimer. Horror Hill is a horror anthology podcast bringing you scary stories from all corners of the internet and beyond. As such, certain stories include content that some listeners might find offensive. Listener discretion is advised. Greetings, listeners, and welcome back to Horror Hill. As always, I'm Erik Peabody, your host and narrator, and tonight we have a triple threat of stories coming to you from author B.A. Rees. His book, Friends, Lovers, and Other Gaslighters, came out a bit earlier this year, and I'm very happy to get to share some selections with you fine people. With 3 stories, we're going to speed run these synopses here. First, Madeline follows a lonely young man studying abroad in Denmark who might have just come across the girl of his dreams. Then, Transformations puts us in the shoes of a has-been children's show actor that has just been asked to a strangely lucrative gig. Finally, in Class of 2013, we learn that there's nothing quite like coming home again, in both good ways and bad. You're listening to the free edition of this program. If you'd like to help support Horror Hill and also remove these pesky ads, head to chillingtalesfordarknights.com and click Patrons in the upper menu to sign up today. You'll get instant access to hundreds of ad-free stories, so what are you waiting for? Also, if you're watching on YouTube, do us a favor and drop a like and subscribe. Become part of our dark circle, listeners. And now, from author B.A. Rees, I give you Madeline. Many people go through a mopey, nobody wants to date me phase. I was in the midst of mine a few years back when I was a junior in college. There's nothing particularly dramatic about it. I had no interest in romance in my teens when plenty of people around me were going through such formative experiences. I hardly socialized either. So, unsurprisingly, when I finally acted on the feelings I started to develop towards certain members of the opposite sex, I was clumsy and awkward, and I met with no success. I recognized that it wasn't too big of a deal in the grand scheme of things, even if it felt catastrophic to me at the time. I was downcast, but not self-pitying. I realized that I had a lot of personal growth ahead of me before I'd have much to offer to another person, and I felt a little lonely and insecure as a result. That insecurity didn't stop me from opting for a semester abroad. It's something I'd always seen as a valuable learning opportunity, and thanks to my school's strong ties with a Danish education program, I soon found myself on a plane from the States to Copenhagen. The first couple of weeks went smoothly enough. I explored plenty of landmarks, from ascending the Round Tower's iconic helical corridor to touring the gigantic Frederiksberg Castle. I also made progress in a basic-level Danish language course. Learning the language in detail was hardly necessary, though, as virtually every resident there would rather practice their English than try to decipher a foreigner's rudimentary Danish. I first saw her at a crowded bar on a Sunday night. My roommate and I were sipping Carlsbergs when I spotted a woman by the door. She had red hair and pale skin, and there was a peculiar kinetic energy about her that caused her to stand out from the crowd. For a moment, we made eye contact. Nervously, I averted my gaze to the floor. My roommate announced that he was turning in for the night. No sooner did he leave than she approached me. When I started mumbling a basic greeting in Danish, she smiled and quickly cut me off. Like most Danes, she spoke fluent English in a Nordic accent. She told me that she'd noticed me looking at her and, to my surprise, asked if I wanted to buy her a drink. Yeah, sure, I said, gesturing for another beer on tap. She introduced herself as Madeline, and at her suggestion, we got ourselves a small table. She asked me a lot of questions, and she seemed to listen intently to my responses. We talked at first about basic subjects, such as my hometown and my reasons for studying abroad, and how she'd grown up nearby but recently returned from traveling through Switzerland and Germany. Before long, we were discussing more personal topics. I explained how my father had passed when I was little, and she shared how she'd recently broken up with a longtime boyfriend. As our conversation stretched out into the early morning, I realized that I felt more comfortable around her than I did around, well, just about anybody else. I found her extremely attractive too, which contributed to my excitement. Eventually, she suggested that we depart. "You going to drink that?" I asked, motioning to the still full beer I'd ordered for her. She laughed and shook her head. She told me that she didn't really drink and had just wanted to see if I'd order it for her. She added that I could have it if I wanted. I took a deep gulp from it as I left payment on the table before following her to the deserted cobblestone street outside. She leaned into me until her face was just inches from mine and asked if I'd ever kissed a girl before. "Yeah," I lied, embarrassed over my inexperience. She whispered another question. Had I ever done more than that? Yeah," I responded. The smirk on her face showed me that she likely didn't believe me. If she sensed I was lying, it didn't seem to bother her. As she drew away from me, she asked if I had plans the next night. She explained that she would be attending a gathering with some friends and family. Afterwards, she said with a wink, we could spend some time together, just the two of us. My heart fluttered. "Oh, yeah, okay," I stammered, nervously. "Sure, I'll be there." That seemed to please her. She proceeded to describe the route I would need to take to get there. I typed each step into my travel flip phone. As we parted ways, she called to me, "Vi ses senere," Danish for "see you later." I practically skipped with joy as I made my way home. After so many self-doubts and restless nights, a charming, gorgeous woman had shown interest in me, of all people. My mind flooded with thoughts of what was to follow. Maybe the event would be awkward and little would come of it. Perhaps I'd say or do something foolish like I had so many times before, and I'd never hear from her again. But just maybe, this could be the start of something meaningful, or at a minimum, something validating and fun. When I got home, I realized that she'd left me with relatively little specific information. Madeline hadn't given me her last name or even her phone number. I had an address, but I had no idea what sort of building I was looking for or the kind of neighborhood I'd be heading into. Her mention of family struck me as strange, too. Who brings someone to a family event on a first, or if last night counted, second date? My mind didn't dwell on these peculiarities for long. Instead, I replayed the wink she gave me when she'd referenced us being alone together. It was more than enough to silence any uncertainties. I spent the next morning preparing. I showered, shaved my face, and picked out a nice shirt. I tried to think in advance of the questions her friends and family members might ask me and practiced my responses before a mirror. My roommate, sensing my purpose, wished me luck as I stepped outside. At first, the journey was unremarkable. The metro station had its usual glossy, spotless appearance. When the fully automated train arrived, I took a seat near a chatty group of teens, and numerous passengers embarked and departed over the next few stops. Things started to change when I reached the Neapolitan station. According to Madeline's instructions, I needed to switch to a train on the Silver Line. However, I couldn't find a platform for such a line, nor did one appear on any of the maps throughout the station. I spotted 2 metro employees and asked them for assistance. They exchanged a quick glance when I mentioned the Silver Line. The first, a pale-faced man, asked if I was certain that I wanted to go there. I nodded, trying to make sense of their grim, concerned expressions. In response, the second, a short, well-built woman with a gray ponytail, beckoned me to follow her. She led me up a small staircase that I otherwise would have assumed connected to a custodial closet or maintenance hatch. At the top, she took me down a shadowy corridor. In contrast to the polished, pristine look of the rest of the station, the walls and flooring in this area were rugged and dirty. We stepped into a cavernous room. A weak, flickering overhead light partially illuminated an empty train platform in its center. A large sign above it displayed the Danish word for silver. In contrast with the other platforms, there appeared to be no ticket booth or electronic indicator of when the next train would arrive. When I asked about this, I found, to my surprise, that the woman who had brought me there was already gone. I was alone. I considered leaving. This all made little sense. The absence of any Silver Line from the map, the platform's dingy appearance, and the reaction of the employees. The air had a rancid, foul smell to it too, and the temperature was much higher than in the rest of the station. But I'd come this far, and it had all accorded, more or less, with the instructions Madeline had left me. I reminded myself, too, of why I was there in the first place. I thought about how comfortable and warm her presence had made me feel last night. I imagined the smile that would spread across her face when she saw me, the feeling of her lips pressed against mine, doing more than kissing, perhaps even quite a bit more. Eventually, 2 harsh red lights punctured the opaque darkness and approached like the eyes of a hunting predator. As they grew closer, I discerned that they were the headlights to an older, shabbier train than the one I'd used to get here. The smudges across its glass windows and the graffiti that covered its metal exterior reminded me much more of public transportation in the US than what I'd seen elsewhere in Copenhagen. Even though the train seemed to be at the end of the line, no one who had arrived on it exited. Instead, the handful of passengers in the car I stepped onto remained eerily silent as I took a seat. An empty glass bottle rolled across its dusty floor as the train jutted back into motion, reversing direction into the black void from which it had emerged. I checked the directions Madeline had given me, 7 metro stops, and then a 5-block walk until I reached the destination, Skeltoft 27. I'd be there soon enough. I tried to relax as the train sputtered along. At the first 2 stops, no one got on or off. By the time the train approached the 3rd stop, I noticed a peculiar stillness among the passengers in my periphery. Neither the lanky man by the door nor the mother and daughter in matching red jackets in the seats ahead of me had moved an inch since I'd gotten aboard. As far as I could tell, everyone around me remained completely motionless. I shifted my gaze to the window on my right as the train approached the 3rd stop. Between the back glare against the dirty glass and the outside platform's minimal lighting, I could barely make anything out. The doors opened, and again, I discerned no movement onto or off of the train. Staring deep into the shadows outside, I noticed something else odd: the vague outlines of figures, all as still as those in my train car. At the 4th station, I observed the same thing. I couldn't identify any details of the distant spectators, beyond that they just seemed to be standing there, doing nothing at all. It perplexed me. Why were they there? As far as I could tell, there wasn't any other train on this track. As the train departed, I picked up on another detail. pairs of tiny neon green dots of light. They were hard to make out at first, but once I noticed them, I couldn't ignore them. Each hovered above the ground, right around where the obscured figures' faces would be. The 5th and 6th stops were the same. Now that I knew to look for them, I detected no fewer than a dozen pairs of these glowing lights, all gazing at the train like eyes that never blinked. As we approached the 7th stop, I wasn't sure what to make of what I'd been seeing. The distant figures spooked me, even though I had no reason to think I was in any danger. But I reflected on just how alone and isolated I was. After all, I was a foreigner traveling to an area I knew nothing about, on a line that didn't appear on maps, all to see someone I'd only just met. I hadn't even told anyone where I was going. But I had to exit the train at some point, even if only to turn around. So I mustered my courage and approached the screen doors, praying that whatever lay in the void ahead of me meant me no harm, and that I'd soon be happily reunited with the gorgeous woman who'd shown so much interest in me. As the doors began to open, my hands shot impulsively to my eyes to protect them from an unexpected and intense wave of what felt like blisteringly bright light. As my eyes started to adjust, I squinted to find before me a fully illuminated train platform. To my relief, it was bereft of any skulking figures, or anyone at all for that matter. Sounds of my footsteps echoed through the vacant train station as I made my way through it. There was nothing odd about its structure or layout, but the absence of other people left me uneasy. I remembered the giggling teens and hand-holding couples I was used to seeing at places like this. Everything around me, by contrast, felt artificial, mechanical, joyless. The street outside had a similarly ethereal aura to it. It possessed all the qualities of the vibrant cityscape I'd spent the last few weeks exploring: cobblestone streets, occasional Baroque churches, crooked houses painted in warm hues of yellow, red, and orange. But it was all quiet, so quiet, and the air carried a suffocating staleness. As I passed by a restaurant, I found myself fixating on its chairs and tables, all uninhabited, like everything else around me. Their design, and the layout in general, were identical to that of an upscale Italian place not far from my dorm back in the States. My mind flashed back to the night I'd taken Audrey, a girl from my chemistry class, out on a date. Our conversation over the meal had been awkward. She'd acted friendly towards me earlier, but that night she'd been guarded and withholding. When the check arrived, I'd tried to pay it in full, but she'd insisted on splitting the expense. As we stepped outside, she confessed that she'd thought we were hanging out as friends and hadn't realized until she'd arrived at the restaurant that I'd asked her on a date. She apologized for having not said anything earlier, as she hadn't known how to best navigate the awkward situation. When she told me she didn't see me that way, I said that it was okay, and I'd apologized for the misunderstanding. I felt terrible, though I tried not to show it. I dismissed the memory quickly. As I continued towards Madeline's address, a distant noise caught my attention. As I got closer, I recognized it as laughter. At first, I found this reassuring. It was the first sign of life I'd encountered after traversing so much seemingly abandoned cityscape. But I steadily picked up on an unwelcome undertone to the shrill giggles ahead of me. There was a piercing meanness to them. They recalled the specter of a group of people, young people by the sound of it, basking in a peer's humiliation. It was a sound I knew too well. When I'd summoned my courage to ask a classmate out to prom, a fellow violinist named Maria I'd shared a stand with in orchestra for over a year, she'd laughed at me like that, and her friends had quickly joined in. Do better, I'd told myself when I'd cried into the mirror that night. Nobody owes me anything. I'd do better tonight, I told myself. Everything was going to change. Madeline and I had made a connection so quickly. She really liked me, and I liked her too. Maybe I'd just grown up on the wrong continent. The laughter got louder until, right as I reached the alley from which it seemed to have been emanating, it stopped and there was no one there to be found. Just keep moving, I told myself, adding it to a list of abnormalities I fought to keep buried in the back of my mind. I'm almost there. Finally, I reached a sign that displayed the name of Madeline Street. The first few buildings were businesses, a deli that served distinctly Danish open sandwiches called Smaubo, a barber shop, a camera store. At last, I found myself facing a brick structure with the number of the address Madeline had given me affixed to its front door. The sign next to the entrance displayed several words that I hadn't yet learned in my Danish language course. Was this a restaurant? If so, it was a fancy one, judging by the black suit on the man by the ornate front desk inside. Incidentally, the first person I'd seen since the train station. I expected to feel some sense of relief at seeing another living, breathing person, but his emaciated appearance and grim expression brought me little comfort. He said something to me in Danish. I think, "Kan jeg hjælpe dig?" Can I help you? But he spoke a little too rapidly for me to be sure. I just stated Madeline's name, hoping he'd understand that I was looking for her. "Madeline," he repeated back to me. He nodded solemnly and then beckoned for me to follow him. We arrived in a large, plain room occupied by at least 24 people. The first thing I noticed about them was how formally they were dressed. My patterned button-down shirt looked outright casual compared to the suit jackets and plain dresses, all muted shades of black and gray, worn by everyone else. Naturally, I felt out of place. Nobody said anything to me, but I sensed, truthfully or not, that I was being judged. Why hadn't Madeline told me this was a fancy event? I wondered, too, where was Madeline? What kind of event had she invited me to? The absence of any food or silverware-laden tables confirmed that I was not, in fact, in a restaurant, as I'd inferred. Rather, the attendees were standing and chatting quietly with each other in voices no louder than a whisper. Nobody really seemed to be doing anything in particular. I approached an elderly man standing alone. "Excuse me," I said meekly. "I'm looking for Madeline?" A puzzled expression formed on his face. As he looked me over skeptically, my face turned red with a mixture of nervousness and embarrassment. I felt so hopelessly lost and confused. He slowly raised his arm and pointed towards the far end of the room. I thanked him before nudging my way through the small crowd in the direction he had indicated. My jaw nearly dropped when I saw the wooden casket, which was decorated by an array of lilies and roses. Madeline lay underneath its open head panel. Her eyes were closed and she was perfectly still. She wore the same clothes I'd seen her in the previous night. A display next to the casket read, "Madeline Larson, December 12, 1994, September 7, 2019. It was too much to take in. My legs grew weak and I began feeling dizzy. My mind raced to process what was happening. Steadily, it dawned on me that somehow, as impossible as it sounded, Madeline had invited me to her own open casket. Something else stuck out to me. Last night, when I'd met Madeline, was September 14th, 1 week after the date listed as that of her death. None of this made sense. What was I doing here? How was any of this possible? The old man who directed me shuffled past me and stood next to the casket. He turned to face the rest of the crowd, which quickly grew silent. I realized he was giving some kind of speech. Was he a relative or a priest, perhaps? He spoke in a coarse, raspy voice. My mind was too astounded for me to grasp a word of what he was saying. I wasn't even sure that it was Danish. The reaction from the crowd baffled me even more. They were laughing. Again and again, the man made comments that I could not understand, and the rest of the room chortled and giggled in response. All I could do was watch, embarrassed and dumbfounded, as I wondered who tells jokes at an occasion like this. Suddenly, all eyes turned to me. "Michael," the man hissed, somehow knowing my name. "It's time." "Time? For what?" I replied, exasperated. I looked around the room at the dozens of people staring intensely at me. "What's happening? What do you want from me?" The man responded that it wasn't him or us who wanted something from me. "No," he said, gesturing to the casket. "It's her." I stood frozen as Madeline's corpse sat up. Madeline opened her eyes and, placing both hands on the casket's mahogany surface, pulled herself slowly upward and hopped onto the floor. She said my name, her voice sounding weaker and coarser than it had last night. "I knew you'd come for me. I just knew it." She wobbled towards me, her legs seemingly straining to support her. I froze, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. Are you... I stuttered. "They're going to bury me, Michael," she said as she continued her approach. As she got closer, I recoiled at her rank, putrid smell. Impulsively, I backed up, only for the speaker to grip me tightly, holding me in place. "I don't want to be alone, Michael," said Madeline. "There's room for us both down there." "No!" I gasped as I struggled to get free. "No, please!" "There's so much that I can show you. It'll be just the two of us, and we'll have all the time in the world. Isn't this what you've always wanted? To never be alone again?" She stood right in front of me now. My stomach churned as the rotting smell grew even more pungent. The world spun around me as panic set in. I remember tearing the man's hands off me, losing my balance, and slamming my head painfully into the casket before I hit the ground. When I came to, my head was throbbing and I was being dragged outside by two men. Graves littered the surrounding landscape. A crowd of people, including Madeline, had assembled by a deep pit a short distance away from me. Next to it was a coffin, a much larger one than I'd ever seen before, large enough for two bodies. I couldn't make sense of anything that was happening, but I knew, with a sense of absolute certainty, that I was about to be buried there. I figured my best bet would be to act before they realized I was awake. Throwing all my force into it, I lunged forward, managing barely to pull myself free. One of the men dived for me, grabbing my leg and sending me toppling over a headstone. As I scrambled to my feet, I noticed a long metal shovel laying atop a pile of dirt. As one of the men charged at me, I picked up the shovel and frantically swung it. The blade slammed into his cheek, sending him sprawling. "What are you doing?" Madeline cried. I didn't respond. My attention was fixed on the man I'd just hit. The force of the blow had somehow fractured his skin. Cracks spread over his face, which then shattered into small pieces that fell onto the ground, revealing the raw bones of his skull and a pair of unblinking, unnaturally bright green eyes. As he got to his feet, seemingly unbothered by the evisceration of his face, my flight instinct kicked in. I remember climbing a fence and ignoring the pain in my ankle when I hit the ground on the other side. I remember the sounds of dozens of footsteps pursuing me and being too afraid to look back. Madeline's voice, brimming with a sense of betrayal, begged me to return. I ran on instinct, retracing my steps as best I could. Figures filled the once deserted streets around me. I ignored their missing faces and the green glow they emitted. I ignored the ones who called for me, who said they wanted me, who resembled Audrey, Maria, and so many others whose rejections haunted my mind every time I closed my eyes at night. By the time I reached the platform, I was breathing rapidly and drenched in sweat. Thankfully, a train was already there. I could hear voices resounding through the station behind me. They were getting closer, louder by the moment. I could tell that the train's doors were about to close. With my last bit of strength, I dashed forward and dove between them. Pain shot through me as my body thudded onto the hard surface inside. When I awoke, my body ached all over. I was laying on a couch in some kind of office, and a woman I recognized as the employee who had led me to the Silver Line stood over me. She asked if I'd found what I was looking for. I was too perplexed to answer. "What? Where am I?" She told me I was in her office in the station where I'd began my journey. "I don't understand." She shrugged. She told me that I didn't have to, and that I should go home. "But," I stammered, "what about the Silver Line and the things I saw?" She replied that the Silver Line was closed for repairs, and repeated, this time in a firm enough voice that I understood it to be a command, that I should go on home. I've never fully understood what happened to me that day. I never saw that employee again, nor any mention of a Silver Line having ever even existed, nor could I find any reference in an atlas to the part of town it had brought me to. When I looked up the words displayed on the building where I'd found Madeline, they translated to undertaker or funeral home. Once, before returning to the States, I ran into the bartender who'd been on duty when I'd met Madeline. When I asked him what he remembered about that night, he responded that he recalled me sitting alone, talking to myself for hours. My physical wounds, bruises, and a sprained ankle healed relatively quickly, but inside, I felt shattered. I became reclusive, focusing entirely on my studies and, after graduating, on my work. A few weeks ago, my brother set me up on a date with a friend of a friend who he insisted was a good fit for me. Understandably, I'd spent the last few years utterly detached from the dating scene and avoiding any perceived advances. But I eventually caved in to my brother's persistence. Her name is Clara, and, well, my brother was right. She and I formed an instant connection, and so far we seem to be a perfect match for each other. The other night, we even exchanged a kiss, the first of my life. We were sitting together in my apartment's living room on a rainy Saturday afternoon when I heard a knock at the door. I opened it to find a bouquet of lilies and roses sitting on the doormat. "Did you order these?" I asked. She shook her head, her expression puzzled and concerned. A small card pinned to the bouquet displayed a short, handwritten message in black ink. I took a deep, nervous breath before reading it to myself. "Death is the great equalizer, Michael. When it comes for you too, know one thing. I will be waiting. Vice Senar, Madeline." You've been listening to Madeline by B.A. Rees. Moving on, here's Transformations. Chances are you've heard Andy Warhol's statement that everyone will be famous for 15 minutes. But you may not know that it was a photographer who first used the expression in a photo shoot with Warhol. Yes, Warhol made it iconic, but the photographer gave him the idea. And the photographer wasn't the first one to come up with it. Centuries ago, the phrase 9 days wonder encapsulated the same concept, though the people who said it back then had a slightly more optimistic length of time in mind. I take a couple of lessons from this. First, there's nothing wrong with using someone else's idea as a basis for your own. Transformation isn't stealing, after all. Second, Warhol and his photographer both defied the statement they made famous. Certainly, their fame lasted longer than 15 minutes, or even 9 days. I tell myself this during the restless periods I spend checking my phone for a call from my agent or an email from a potential customer asking to hire me for a gig. By any account, my own 15 minutes of fame are past. Yet, I dream of the spotlight shining on me again. You see, I starred in a kids' television show for 3 years called Lucian and the Lily Crank. It's a show that little kids love. Each episode would consist of me, wearing a goofy black hat, an orange shirt, and a ridiculous dark purple cape, going on adventures with a computer-generated creature. I was Lucian, and the creature was Lilycrank. My character existed to connect the audience to the show through a human protagonist, and I was chosen for the role because of my youthful face and my uncanny ability to maintain a jolly demeanor throughout grueling 15-hour shoots. Lilycrank resembled a sheep, but had wings that allowed her to fly around like a dragon. She looked fearsome enough to be cool while also retaining a sense of gentleness and cuteness. She could breathe fire, but only did so for peaceful purposes, like melting ice in order to free a baby elephant that fell underneath a frozen lake. Anyway, Lilycrank would fly me around as we solved mysteries, visited magical kingdoms, and interacted with guest stars, all while teaching lessons to kids. At one point early in each episode, I would receive news that Lilycrank was needed somewhere, so I would call out for her, chanting, "The danger is real. This is not a prank. We need your help, Lilycrank." She wouldn't appear at first, so I'd turn to the camera and request the audience to sing along, and only then would she actually appear. Of course, this made for a sad spectacle in studio. I'd beg the camera to sing along, and, even though nothing was happening, I'd pretend like an audience had spoken up with sufficient volume. Worse, naturally, no dragon would actually appear on set. Lilycrank would only be added much later in the production process, and I had to perform my character around several tennis balls arranged in front of a blue screen. But, as our ratings indicated, hundreds of thousands of kids were following my instructions and were swept away by the appeal of me and the friendly dragon sheep. I loved seeing the reaction of our fans when I made public appearances promoting the show. Nothing brought joy to my soul quite like seeing the eyes of children light up when they recognized me in costume. I won't hide that the show borrowed heavily from other works like Harry Potter and Dora the Explorer, but the kids didn't know that, not yet at least. For 3 years, they loved it. Lucian and the Lilycrank was such a hit that plush toys of Lilycrank and other merchandise regularly sold out around the holidays. But I could always sense such success would be short-lived. Before long, the kids moved on. The original audience had grown up and started to enjoy the books and movies from which we'd borrowed ideas, and the next generation of preschoolers had found fresher, newer shows to watch. Worse, even though Lucian and Lilycrank was canceled 4 years ago, I was forever pegged as the guy from that kid's show. Nobody else in the industry wanted to hire me because they knew, correctly, that audiences would only associate me with that one character I had once played. At first, I found plenty of gigs performing at rich kids' birthday parties. I charged a high rate and pretended that I was barely able to fit the appearance into my schedule. I even had the funds to put together a prop blow-up Lilycrank that, with proper setup, could float briefly in the air, open its mouth, and appear to make some of its signature sounds with the help of a hidden stereo system. I'd put on a short sketch using a few props and then just interact with the kids, telling some jokes and doing some amateurish magic tricks that appeared vaguely reminiscent of special effects on the show. The kids often loved it, but the whole ordeal felt ridiculous, even embarrassing to me. To make matters worse, on a few occasions, parents had hired me for parties for kids who they hadn't realized no longer liked the show, and the kids proceeded to pelt me with birthday cake and anything else at their disposal. But, having failed to find any acting success elsewhere, I needed the money, so I kept accepting whatever work I could find. I bring up all this backstory to explain what my life was like when I got a particular offer, one that raised red flags that would have caused anyone else to turn it down. The email arrived on a Sunday morning and asked for my services the next evening. This was a bit odd, as most of my performances took place on weekend mornings or afternoons, and most offers were made well in advance of the date of performance. But I took little notice. The writer, who did not include his or her name, offered me $5,000 for one of my live appearances at a house with a zip code that I vaguely recognized as being within a nice part of a suburb about an hour south of me. The mention of $5,000 for one performance obviously caught my eye. I usually only charged a couple hundred. Excitedly, I responded right away with my usual pretensions about having a busy schedule, but luckily could work this appearance in due to a recent cancellation. I asked how I would be paid, if there would be a good power source, or if I needed to bring my portable generator, and how long my act should be. I got a response less than a minute later that read simply, "Cash, we will provide what you need, as long as necessary. Arrive at 8 p.m. I asked a couple follow-up questions, but received no further response. This was obviously not how the booking process usually worked, but ever since I dropped to being only one of dozens of clients to my agent, I had to improvise. Still, it was odd being paid such a high amount in cash, and odder still to be appearing relatively late on a weeknight. Look, I get that going to a house alone at night is something no smart person should do, and the unusually large promised payment only raised additional suspicions. I thought about whether this was some elaborate plot to rob or kidnap me. But the location was in a safe part of town, and I wanted both the money and the reinforcement of the sense that I deserved it. So I spent Monday afternoon gathering my costume and props, and drove out in the early evening. As my GPS brought me to a pristine residential neighborhood, I saw familiar sights of parents walking their dogs and kids playing basketball in the streets. My GPS guided me through several turns until I was driving up a heavily wooded hill to another branch of the suburb. Finally, I saw the street I was looking for, Peakview Drive. The road took me slightly downhill to a flat, elevated area with 7 or 8 additional houses arranged in a loop. Above the tree line, the descending sun left a vibrant red sky. The homes here were similar to the ones below, but a strange stillness gripped the cul-de-sac they surrounded. I parked my car in front of the address I'd been given, and when I got out, I took note of a general silence, abated only by the whispers of a distant breeze. There were no parents, children, or pets, and certainly no idyllic white picket fences. The houses had undecorated exteriors and empty front yards. A missing cat poster added to the gloomy setting that started to put me in an ominous mood. I knew I had to fight against that. I was about to put on an act that required me to be earnest and enthusiastic, while wearing laughable clothes and interacting with cheap props. This appearance would be like most, I told myself, with gawking kids circled around me and entertained by my performance. A white van then approached from the same direction I had taken and parked behind me. Oh, great, I thought to myself. My kidnapper has arrived. Instead, a short, thin woman in a faded blue uniform stepped out. Her van showed that she was a plumber, and she carried an appropriate toolkit. "You live here?" She smirked, looking me over. "No," I said. "I'm just here as a hired performer, I assume for some kids' party." "That explains the outfit," she said, laughing. I tried not to act offended. "Yes, I suppose I look a bit silly, especially if you've never seen the show." She cut me off. "Got a call from the city to check out a potential water leak here," she said. "I've been running around doing jobs all day. Hopefully this one won't take too long and I can get back home at a decent hour." She trudged past me and walked up to the front door. I finished putting on my costume, forced a cheery smile onto my face, and, carrying a large box full of props, followed her path. The colonial-style house before me seemed innocuous enough. It was plainly designed and no different from the houses I'd passed on my way up. On the second floor, several large windows jutted out. I saw odd specks of light in one, but when I squinted to look more closely, the blinds abruptly tightened. A bit perturbed, I knocked on the door, and a woman opened it only a moment later. She was as tall as me and maybe in her mid-40s. Her sandy hair was slicked back, and she had clear green eyes. "Lucian, at your service, ma'am," I called out, grinning. "If you can direct me to the right location, I can start setting up." "Come in," she said in a monotone voice. "Call me Stacy." I instantly got a sadly familiar feeling that a parent who hated the show had hired me. I only hoped that she was correct that the kids I'd be performing for actually liked it. As I stepped inside a hallway, I saw a staircase to a basement that the plumber had begun to descend. "Good luck, Magic Man," she said, winking and twirling a ring of keys Stacy must have given her as she walked out of sight. "A most unpleasant surprise," Stacy said as she motioned me toward a door at the end of the hallway. "The plumber?" I asked. "She said the city reported a leak. It's probably a good thing she's here to fix it." Stacy didn't respond or even look in my direction. We passed a compact, clean-looking kitchen as we continued down a long, wood-lined corridor. "Your email didn't give me a lot of details," I said, "and I was hoping you could answer a few questions." She interrupted as she opened the door. "Set up on the stage. We will come when you are ready." Before me was an elevated platform surrounded by several rows of surprisingly fancy seats arranged neatly like they were in a theater. I hadn't imagined that this house could contain a formal auditorium like this. How many kids were going to be here? It looked like there was enough seating for several dozen, at least. I heard the door close behind me and noticed that Stacy was gone. This all made me feel odd and uncomfortable. Stacy had been cold and uninterested in me or my questions. Usually, there were dozens of children noisily running around any home or backyard where I was about to perform. But today, I hadn't seen anyone aside from Stacy and the plumber. The whole house had been totally silent since I arrived, and it isn't exactly common for a house to contain a room this large. I wondered, too, in what sort of situation would enough kids attend to fill it up on a Monday night? Maybe this neighborhood had some kind of regular event for youths? But I was already here, an hour from home and with my costume and gear, so I decided to go ahead with the performance. No matter how badly things went, I would drive off $5,000 richer, and that was all the motivation I needed. I set up the lily crank props, both the blow-up version that could make sounds and the plush version I would let the kids pass around at the end, and the speaker system that included music and sound effects to which I would sync the physical performance. The last thing I needed to do was plug the speaker system into a power outlet, but the only remaining outlet near the stage was in an awkward position behind a wooden table. I had to lie down, crawl under the table, and carefully plug the cord into a socket. As I was doing this, the light around me flickered and then began fading. By the time I stood up, everything around me was pitch black. My eyes slowly adjusted to the darkness, and I started to discern lights in the distance. My heart trembled at the sight before me. Dozens of pairs of striking, luminescent green eyes lit up where the seats should be located. It was like being watched by the glowing eyes of animals, eyes that never blinked. Suddenly, the green eyes faded out of my vision as a blinding bright light enveloped the stage. My own eyes had to readjust, and once they did, I found myself in the position of a performer on stage at a far more formal occasion than that to which I was accustomed. I could see the stage well, but the audience and their terrifying eyes were shrouded in darkness. Stacy stepped forward, her face still blank. Her green eyes caught my attention more than they did before. "Start," she said. I panicked. Everything around me felt so wrong. What was going on? What children have glowing eyes, and why were they all the same color? My mind ran through excuses I could say to leave, money be damned. I could claim I felt sick, or even that I had stage fright. Whatever it took, I wanted to get out of that house. "Now," Stacy said with frightening firmness. Behind her, I could see the green eyes emerging again from the darkness. They cast a stronger color than before. They were somehow getting brighter and seemingly angrier. "I said now," stammered Stacy in a louder yet still emotionally empty voice. The dozens of eyes now transitioned from green to a hot, fiery orange. I developed a strong sense that an undesirable outcome awaited me if I failed to perform. I delved within myself for the earnest spirit that landed me the job on the show, and mustering all the strength within me, put on a smile and started my routine. As soon as I started playing my character, the luminescent eyes faded from orange to green, and then they receded again into the darkness. For the first few minutes of lighthearted jokes and magic tricks, I heard no response from the audience, aside from Stacy, who sat close by and half illuminated by the stage light. I felt like I was performing to a totally empty room. Finally, it came time for me to call in Lilycrank. I yelled out the key phrase, "The danger is real. This is not a prank. I need your help, Lilycrank." I then looked at the audience and asked for them to chant the rhyme with me. Usually, the kids enjoyed this part of the act and enthusiastically joined in. I was not surprised, however, when my call was met with total silence. Without a single voice joining me, I wasn't at all sure what to do or how to proceed. I froze. A moment passed. "Continue," said Stacy unsympathetically. I sensed unease in the eerily silent room. Behind Stacy, I saw the rows of eyes light up once more. "Continue," Stacy said. I swallowed. Taking a deep breath, I whispered to her, "They have to repeat the rhyme with me." Stacy looked surprised. "Repeat the rhyme." "Yes," I said. Hadn't they seen the show? "Oh, wait one moment," she said. She left my line of sight and entered the endless dark void that surrounded me. I felt sweat drip down my face. More and more sets of green eyes appeared all over the room. Instead of dozens, there now seemed to be hundreds, yet I could hear no noise aside from the throbbing of my heart. Stacy returned to her seat. "Do it again," she said. "Say it, then ask them to join in." My eyes grew wide in disbelief. What was happening? What was Stacy doing in the darkness? And how long did this have to go on? "The danger is real. This is not a prank. I need your help, Lilycrank," I whimpered. Then I again instructed the audience to join me. A deafening wave of sound followed as the echoing sound of 100 voices hollered back, "The danger is real. This is not a prank. I need your help, Lilycrank." They spoke mechanically and in perfect unison. The utter joylessness of their collective voice disturbed me. It obviously sounded nothing like the discordant voices of young fans of the show that I was used to hearing. I proceeded, tugging at a string I had set up and causing the inflatable Lilycrank prop to float on stage. Normally, the little kids would laugh in delight at this, but naturally, all that greeted it now was uninterrupted silence. I felt painfully self-conscious. I told a corny joke as the prop slowly approached the stage, commenting on how Lilycrank was keeping me waiting too long by dragoning her feet. "Normally they laugh," I whispered to Stacy in the quiet that followed. Admittedly, this was an exaggeration. "Oh," she said, disappearing again into the darkness. Her return a few moments later was accompanied by a tremendously loud and hollow sound. "Ha, ha, ha, ha," rang out the audience, enunciating together exactly 4 mechanical, fake-sounding laughs. I pressed a button on a remote control hidden in my pocket that turned on the audio system. Gentle kids' music started playing, punctuated with some of Lilycrank's signature sounds. The glowing eyes appeared again, and I could tell that they were growing fiery once more. Maybe it was just my imagination, or maybe I was beginning to lose balance from nervousness, but I swear that I felt the stage surface shaking, as if the room itself was angry with me. "We don't like this," yelled Stacy. "Turn the music off! Turn it off!" My shaking hands took hold of the remote and returned the room to silence, bringing about another sense of relative calm. What the fuck was happening? "Is there anything else we need to do?" asked Stacy, noting my hesitation. "Should we laugh, clap, or chant again?" No," I responded. "Then continue," said Stacy. "Now." "Stacy, I have to stop," I stuttered. I can't do this anymore." "Are you refusing to complete your performance?" Stacy asked, visibly offended. My brain ran through every lie I could think of, trying to find one that would work. I need to get a drink of water," I said. "That's it," I thought. "I'll step outside for just a second, and then I'll get the hell out of here, never to return. They haven't paid me. It's not like I'll have stolen anything. I'll just leave, and then I'll figure out what to do next." Stacy looked at me quizzically. Then she stepped into the darkness. A moment later, a glimmer of light appeared down the center of the room, between the rows of seats, making out a path between the stage and the door. "This way," said Stacy, standing by the exit. "We are waiting." It took a substantial effort to restrain myself from sprinting away. Instead, I walked slowly out of the room, trying my best to appear calm. Once I closed the door behind me, leaving Stacy and whatever else was in the mini auditorium out of sight, I saw no need to maintain the ruse. I sprinted to the front door and frantically pulled the handle. It was locked. I felt absolute panic rush through my head. My orange shirt was stained heavily with sweat. I turned the lock again and again, clueless as to whatever else I could do. Then, I remembered the plumber and the key set. Surely, if I found her, I could convince her to let me out of the house. I knew I had to move fast, lest the inhabitants of the auditorium come looking for me. So downstairs I went. The first room in the basement was large, clean, and mostly empty. At one end, I saw what looked like a small laundry room. Guessing that the plumber could be there, I flipped on a flickering light and looked inside, where I saw only a toolkit next to a dripping pipe by a washing machine. "Hello?" I said, trying to be loud enough that anyone in the basement could hear me, but not so loud as to alert anyone upstairs. Hearing no response, I walked to the only other door, one that I guessed would go to the area underneath the auditorium. What I found, upon opening the door, shocked me. The first thing that struck me was the size of the chasm in front of me. Its vast, crater-like structure descended deep into the ground. Later, I would wonder things like, how could a house built atop this emptiness avoid collapsing? It was as if the auditorium was hovering in place, with no structure supporting it. But in that moment, my mind was too busy trying to make sense of the translucent, grayish liquid that filled the massive space before me, forming a kind of lake. It reminded me of soapy water, but this substance had a shiny, silver-like tint. Peering into it, I noticed objects floating within the liquid. They were all at least several feet beneath the surface, and there were hundreds of them. I gasped when I realized what they were. Human bones. This bizarre basement pool was filled with them. I'd stumbled upon some kind of crypt or mass grave. I backed up as something emerged from the lake. It was the plumber. Her face was expressionless, and she showed no concern about the fact that she was soaked in a bizarre, bone-filled pool. As she climbed out, the liquid beneath her somehow solidified. I watched, my jaw dropped, as she walked on top of it until she was mere feet from me. "Looking for me?" she asked, and as she did so, she flashed a set of striking green eyes. I got lost. As I stepped backwards, my foot landed on something soft. I looked down to find the plumber's clothes, her whole outfit, along with her toolkit and keyring. How could her clothes be here and also on the figure before me? "You were supposed to be teaching the children," she said. My survival instincts kicked in. I was getting the fuck out. I only remember my adrenaline-fueled actions that followed in brief snippets. Grabbing the key set, sprinting back across the basement, bursting up the staircase, shoving a piece of furniture behind the closed basement door. Upon reaching the house's front entrance, I chanced to glance down the hall towards the auditorium. Thankfully, no one was there, and the door remained shut. I got to work on finding the correct key. There were at least 10 to choose from. The first didn't work. When I tried to take hold of the second, my hands, shaking with nervousness, let the ring slip to the ground. I picked it up, only for the impact of a heavy force against the barricaded basement door to prompt me to drop it again. Fuck, I thought. I can do this. I took a deep breath, calmed myself, and tried again. And again. Finally, the door opened. I hurried outside, only to find that the cul-de-sac was no longer vacant. It was now filled with children. They all had the same phosphorescent green eyes that shined in the darkness of the evening. The kids weren't running around and playing. They just stood still and gazed at me with vacant expressions. A strong hand gripped my shoulder from behind. "You can't leave," said Stacy. "You haven't finished your lesson." I tried to rush away, but Stacy held me firmly. With as much force as I could muster, I pried her off of me and shoved her away. Stacy hit the ground. I didn't think she landed too hard, but she lay totally still for a moment, as if seriously hurt. The eyes of the children around me began changing once again from green to fiery orange. Meanwhile, Stacy's body contorted. It convulsed and, as she stood up, took on a twisted form. Her neck stretched to an impossible length and drooped down her side, leaving her head and its fiery eyes dangling upside down as she stumbled toward me. I ran to my car as fast as I could and climbed inside. The children now were all moving towards me, slowly and steadily. "The danger is real," they chanted again and again in unison. "The danger is real. The danger is real." In my rearview mirror, I caught for a brief moment a glimpse of one of the children, with what appeared to be sharp canine teeth in his mouth, and he hissed at me. Behind him stood the plumber, her orange eyes burning fiercely in my direction. After turning the car on, I floored the accelerator. When I reached the stop sign at the end of the street, I could still hear the chanting behind me. I sped through the rest of the suburb and drove for hours on the interstate in no particular direction, putting as much distance as possible between me and what I had seen. I never got many answers about what had happened. When I tried talking to the police, they asked me questions about drug use and the state of my mental health. I can't say I blamed them. My story made no sense after all, especially considering the houses along the cul-de-sac on Peakview Drive were supposed to be vacant. Construction had finished in this area, but the homes had not yet gone on sale. There had been no reports of squatters, much less dozens of children residing in the area. Certainly, the police assured me, none of these houses hovered above a pool of mysterious liquid. A plumber had been sent out to the area that day to investigate a reported water leak, but by all accounts, she'd fixed the problem without incident. I never recovered the props I'd brought with me that night. This ended up being a blessing in disguise, as it pushed me to finally embark on a new career. I've moved on from dreams of regaining minor fame, and I've started to get on 2 feet at becoming self-sufficient once again. But the memories never faded. I greet strangers warily, looking for any sign that they might not be who they say they are. Most recently, 2 teenagers knocked at my door. They invited me to a fundraiser, something about opposing local deforestation, that would occur that weekend at a local museum. It was a serious issue, one of them explained to me. As the other handed me a flyer on the subject, a luminous glimmer in his hazel eyes brought back every horrible memory from that night. "The danger is real," he said with a smile. You've just heard Transformations by B.A. Rees. Lastly, to finish up our evening's entertainment, I present Class of 2013. There's a saying in my hometown: nobody leaves Copper Hill for good. For years, I'd mostly managed to defy it. In the decade that followed my graduation from Copper Hill High School, I hardly set foot in its vicinity. Instead, I absorbed myself in my studies at an out-of-state university and, eventually, my career. I spent the little free time I had with my girlfriend, who I'd met as a sophomore in a chemistry lab, and her friends. When we eventually broke up, I lost not only her, but also what little social life I had. It was in this state of loneliness that I found a letter from my old high school in the mail. This surprised me, as I hadn't realized that anyone there even knew my current mailing address. I opened the envelope to find an invitation inside. Its design was fancier than I'd expected, complete with gold-colored glitter, a royal blue background, and a finely drawn silver border. It read, in cursive letters, "Cheers for 10 years, Zachary R. Please join us for the CHHS Class of 2013 official reunion." It went on to list a start time and the school's address. On its back, it contained a personalized handwritten note. "I know you live far away, Zach, but it would mean so much to me if you can make the trip. Paul and I will be there, and Arthur may fly in as well. I'd love to catch up. Hope to see you soon. Vince K., Co-Chair, CHHS Reunion Planning Committee." Vince had been one of my best friends once. You see, Copper Hill is one of those rare small towns where you can easily graduate from high school alongside the same friends you first made in kindergarten. In my case, my buddies Arthur, Paul, and Vince. I'd spent most of my youth with them. The four of us were in the same scout troop, played on the same sports teams, and took mostly the same classes. On weekends, and on weeknights when we felt like sneaking out without permission, we often stayed up late together playing video games and drinking whatever cheap beer we managed to keep hidden from our parents. We'd meant so much to each other. So why, since graduation, had I neglected them so badly? I couldn't even remember the last time I'd talked to any of them. Perhaps this reunion could serve as an opportunity for me to reignite friendships I'd let fade. At a minimum, I knew that spending time, even just one evening, with my old pals would do me a lot of good, especially considering how lonely I'd been lately. Accordingly, I resolved to attend. By the time I reached Copper Hill, I was an hour behind schedule due to congestion caused by an accident. As I approached town, I observed amidst the fading evening light that it appeared even quieter and more deserted than I remembered. Bars that had reliably drawn decent crowds on a Friday night ranged from boarded up to barely occupied. Meanwhile, the few other cars on the street drove lethargically at speeds far below the limit, and I spotted no pedestrians. In my memory, the school was only a short distance from the courthouse, city hall, and post office that formed most of downtown. But my GPS took me down a long, unfamiliar route bordered on both sides by tall cornfields. I was about to pull over and double-check the address I'd entered when, sure enough, my headlights illuminated a sign in the school's distinct black and red colors that stated, CHHS, Home of the Patriots. The brick building that loomed behind it was just as I remembered, from its tall, towering middle section to the two narrower wings that stretched out to the left and right. Through the rectangular windows that lined the main building, I made out indistinct, shadowy figures milling about inside. A banner displaying, Welcome, 10 years, CHHS Reunion, stretched over the stairs that led to the main entrance. Underneath it, a familiar figure scurried towards the building. Arthur, I said to myself with a smile. Seeing Arthur improved my mood. He was the only other member of our class to leave town after graduation, and I suspected that he might share somewhat of an outsider status with me. It'll be just like old times, I reassured myself as I approached the building. Strangely, though, it still didn't feel that way. For one, the air had a staleness to it that was difficult to describe. It felt artificial and thin, such that, as I climbed the front steps, I found myself needing to breathe in more of it than usual to avoid getting winded. Plus, the school's location still seemed off somehow. It didn't make any sense. It's not like a building this large could have been relocated. But amidst the eerily quiet surrounding countryside, everything felt more isolated and remote than I remembered it being. I tried to stop worrying. After all, with any luck, I'd soon be laughing and reminiscing with old friends who'd be happy to see me. Inside, balloon garlands, multicolored streamers, triangle flags, and small banners welcoming attendees decorated the main corridor. I observed tables stocked with snacks, pamphlets, and information about fundraisers. The only noise came from the intercom, which played an era-appropriate Calvin Harris song. Everything necessary for a reunion was there, with only one notable exception: the people. As I approached an unmanned table marked check-in, I wondered where everybody had gone. Perhaps the event had moved to a different room? I was late, after all. As I added my signature to a sign-in sheet, my eyes scanned the list of other attendees who were marked as having already arrived. I recognized many names on it. Like Alice, who'd shared a stand with me in orchestra. Our conductor was a hard-ass, a real disciplinarian who snapped at us constantly, and Alice was one of the many students he'd driven to tears on a semi-regular basis. I'd had this petty fantasy of comforting her after class and then mustering the courage to ask her out. But I never did it. It was Vince, actually, who ended up with her. That had always annoyed me. I'd confided in Vince about how I felt about Alice, and soon after, the two of them were together. It felt as frustrating as it sounds. But, well, that's what I get for hesitating for as long as I did. Drifting down the hallway, my eyes caught the word reception displayed over double doors that led to the gymnasium. It made sense as the main location for the event. That's where homecoming, prom, and plenty of major sports events were held, after all. I could hear chatter, laughter, and the loud thump of dance music just beyond the gym doors. I approached it excitedly. But when I stepped inside, all the noise instantly cut out, leaving me in an eerie silence. Even more perplexingly, the room before me, like the entrance corridor, was entirely devoid of people. A party had just been here, no doubt. I spotted a makeshift bar stocked with a standard assortment of liquor, tables holding half-finished drinks and refreshments, and an area cleared for a dance floor in the room's center. But there were no people around. Had I missed everyone again? Where had they gone? "Hello?" I called out, to no avail, as I drifted around the room in a state of bewilderment. As I did so, I came across the entrance to the boys' locker room. Just a whiff of the musty, sweaty smell emanating from it unlocked long-buried memories of the time I'd spent in there. I remembered one occasion in particular where Paul had gotten pissed at me. Paul was usually a pretty low-key guy, but when he lost it, he went wild. On that particular occasion, he'd been angry with me, hadn't he? But why? I recalled his hot breath as he got in my face and screamed at me. When I gently nudged him away, he responded by slamming a locker door into my head. My memories from that moment forward were hazy. There was a growing pool of blood, the pain of his fist against my cheek, and the cheering of the classmates who had encircled us. They were egging us on to continue the fight, as if my beating could be called that. I hadn't thought about this event in years. How could I have forgotten something like that? My mind churned in confusion. Feeling dizzy, I took a seat on a bench that appeared to be part of a crude photo booth setup as my mind continued to replay this repressed memory. As Paul had continued to pummel me, I'd spotted Vince among the gathered crowd. I'd begged for him to intervene, but neither he nor our strangely absent instructor had done anything to help me. It was only when Arthur got between us that Paul had reluctantly cooled off. It had taken weeks for those bruises to heal. Had Paul ever been punished for it? Or even apologized? Surely he must have. We'd remained friends, after all. A strange pressure around my shoulder and a sudden bright light jolted me back to the present. The flash on the camera facing the bench I was sitting on had gone off somehow, even with nobody around to operate it. How was that possible? Maybe it was automated to go off every so often? It didn't make sense, just like so much else that was happening. Where was everybody? And whose voices had I been hearing? I'd seen people from the road, and I'd even watched Arthur come inside, but as far as I could tell, the event was deserted. I texted Arthur asking if he found anyone. For all I knew, he could have changed his number in the many years that had gone by since I'd last used it, but I figured it was worth a shot. To my relief, he responded right away. "Hey man, long time no see. Paul just called me. He says everyone's up on the 3rd floor in Mr. Manelli's old room. I'm on my way there now. Meet you there soon." I couldn't fathom why the entire event would relocate from the area clearly designated for it to the 3rd floor. There wasn't much up there, after all, aside from classrooms and a few administrative offices. Nonetheless, I resolved to head up there. Arthur was there, after all, and hopefully the rest of my friends would be as well. Navigating off my memory of the building's layout, I hopped up a small set of steps that connected the gym to the 2nd floor. From there, it would just be a short walk past a few classrooms before I'd arrive at the central staircase, which would take me to my destination. I'd never seen the school quite this gloomy before. Each footstep echoed through the halls. The classrooms were weirdly empty, too, bereft of any decorations or other signs of use. I recognized one as my calculus classroom. I remembered how, after class had ended one day, I'd come across a group of students congregating in the hallway. Mary, Michelle, and Abby, like so many of my classmates, had grown up with me, and I'd always gotten along with them. But that day, they were harassing a shy girl, Morgan, I think, calling her all sorts of names: slut, whore, bitch. She was trying to get away from them, but they wouldn't let her leave. Their taunting of her became a regular thing, and it often left Morgan in tears. Whatever happened to Morgan? Like most of my friends, I'd known her since I was a little kid. She was quiet, but she was perfectly nice. Then, one day, gossip about her started to spread. The type of nasty, embellished rumors that often make their way through high schools, full of sexist undertones and double standards. Her former friends shunned her, and she'd been subjected to taunting and ridicule as she walked to class and sat alone at lunch. And one day, she was just gone. I'd always assumed that her family moved away. But was that true? Growing up, Mary, Michelle, and Abby had always been sweet girls. I'd never seen them treat another person the way they'd treated Morgan. But Copper Hill High School had a way of bringing out the worst in people. There was just something about this building, this place, that ate away at our souls. Had I bullied Morgan too? Maybe not, but once her mistreatment started, it's not like I'd made an effort to be kind to her or ever invited her to sit with me and my friends in the cafeteria. I could have done more. I reached the central staircase. With each step that I took up towards the 3rd floor, a feeling of dread ran through me. I'd seen something terrible happen up here, hadn't I? It was Paul and Vince. Arthur had done something to offend them. It could have been the rumors spreading about his reasons for never having a girlfriend, his diminutive size, or the way he'd reacted when Paul had beaten me half to death. Whatever the reason, Paul and Vince, without my knowledge, had decided to subject Arthur to a cruel prank. After school one day, they had lured Arthur on up to the 3rd floor, where they'd taken hold of him and tried to wedge him into his own locker. Now, there's a reason this sort of thing occurs primarily on 90s sitcoms. Most people simply can't fit inside of a locker. Arthur, as short and skinny as he was, turned out to be no exception. But this only made things worse for him. As Arthur later related to me, Paul and Vince laughed rowdily as they slammed him repeatedly into the metal frame. By the time they finally relented, Arthur had bruises all over his body. There were other horrible acts too. Other victims, other beatings. It dawned on me that this place had been an absolute hellhole. It's no wonder I, and Arthur too, had gotten as far away from it as we could at the first opportunity. The peculiar thing was that in the years that had passed, I'd somehow forgotten all of this until just now. Instead, my recollections of high school were all happy, all positive. Had false memories of camaraderie and friendship drawn Arthur back as well? Finally, I reached the 3rd floor. The overhead fluorescent light fixtures flickered sporadically, revealing, in brief spurts, dilapidated lockers, litter, and layers of dust and dirt that coated the floor. I approached Mr. Minnelli's classroom. Through the shaded hallway window, I could discern the outlines of roughly a dozen figures inside. I heard a voice, too. It was muffled and indistinct, but I could tell that the speaker was giving some kind of speech. She stopped, and a loud round of applause followed. I reached for the door handle, unsure of what to expect. Hopefully, it would just be the people I'd driven 4 hours to see. But after the events thus far, I half expected the room to be empty. If so, I was jumping ship and going home. To my surprise, just before I made contact with it, the door slowly opened on its own. The brightly lit room before me was filled not with people, at least in the general understanding of the word. Rather, the still, bony forms before me resembled the kind of props a biology teacher might use to teach human anatomy. The skeletons that stood silently throughout the room, that stood posed with drinks, that sat on desks, and that had assembled around a speaker, had to be props, right? Even though Mr. Minnelli was a history teacher? My mind searched desperately for some kind of explanation. This had to be an elaborate prank, right? Had Vince and Paul lured me, and maybe Arthur too, out here just to freak us the fuck out? I wouldn't put it past them. It's precisely the kind of thing they'd do, even if the whole setup, complete with an array of prop skeletons, was a bit extreme. But then, who was making all the noises I'd been hearing? Was that part of the prank too? Fuck it, I thought. If this was a big gag at my expense, then I just have to deal with the embarrassment later. I was getting out of there. "Zach?" called a strained voice in the hallway. "If this is a joke, then it's not," the voice interrupted me. "Zach, help me, please." It was Arthur's voice, and it was coming from the hallway nearby. He sounded like he was in serious trouble, so I hurried after him. Eventually, I found myself in a corner of the hallway, one where, if I remembered correctly, he and I used to have lockers. But once again, I found myself alone. I yelled out his name several times. "Arthur? Arthur!" But it was no use. I appeared to be at a dead end. That's when the locker next to me shook. I jumped back, surprised. It was shut, but not locked. I gripped the handle and pulled it open. Nothing could have prepared me for what I saw inside. It was Arthur's torso. The rest of his body was gone, and something was dragging what was left of him further away, further back into a dark abyss where the wall should have been. Blood gurgled out of his mouth as he gasped my name one last time. He reached out a blood-covered hand. Hoping to somehow pull him out, I tried to take it, only for whatever unseen force had taken hold of him to pull him away, leaving behind a wide hole in the back of the locker. More blood gushed through it, leaking onto the hallway floor. "So glad you could make it," said a monotone voice behind me. I whirled around to see two fleshy arms emerge from another locker across from me. The skinless figure left wet, red stains on the white surface as she got to her feet and stepped towards me. "Don't you recognize your old crush? Surely 10 years haven't been that rough on me." "Hollis?" I stuttered as I retreated backwards. At once, a series of loud noises rang out as the lockers around me violently burst open. Dozens of figures, all just as deteriorated as the one who stood before me, proceeded to crawl out of the narrow openings. Their faces were decrepit and sunken. To my horror, I realized that each of their eyes were locked squarely onto me. My survival instincts kicked in. I sprinted away, my legs frantically carrying me towards the main staircase. All around me, figures emerged, reaching out to me as I passed by. Through an open door, I noticed that another classroom was filled with skeletons, just as Mr. Manelli's had been. When I reached the main staircase, it was guarded by a tall, fleshy figure. "Don't you want to be with us?" it asked in a familiar, deep voice that I knew to be Paul's. "We can be complete. A full class, all of us, together again, like old times." He lurched for me. Just barely, I managed to dodge him, but I lost balance in the process. Before I knew it, I was tumbling down the stairs. Pain shot through me as I collided with step after step. Finally, I landed on a level surface. Dizzily, I climbed to my feet and did my best to ignore the soreness that spread throughout my body. A quick glance upwards confirmed that the bloody figures, the ones that somehow resembled my old classmates, were indeed heading towards me. Meanwhile, the temperature inside was rising noticeably, and the walls around me were steadily changing in color from a dull gray to a deep red. As I scrambled down the rest of the stairs and across the main corridor on the first floor, an intense tremor ran through the building, sending me sprawling to the ground. Despite a sharp pain that spread through my ankle, I hobbled as quickly as I could to the exit. I didn't look back as I made my way across the parking lot to my car. I started the ignition, backed out, and headed towards the long road I'd used to get there. In my rearview mirror, I chanced to glance back at the school. It was shaking violently, like it was being struck by an earthquake. My car lurched in different directions as the ground underneath me also started to rumble. In an effort to avoid my car being sent off the road and into the neighboring fields, I frantically steered it to the center, between the lanes heading into and out of town. When I looked back again, the school was somehow even closer to me than it had been before. How was that possible? Was it following me? I floored the accelerator. Row after row of cornfield flew by me as I drove at the fastest speed of my life. I was on the edge of town, close to the nearest interstate ramp, when local police pulled me over. As the officer approached me, I stared into the rearview mirror. At the first glimpse of whatever it was that had chased after me, I'd hit the road again. Law enforcement be damned. In truth, I hadn't seen my pursuer since I'd exited the cornfield a few minutes ago, but I hardly felt safe. "Clocked you going nearly 100, son," said the officer. I stayed silent. My baffled self was unsure of how to best handle the situation. The officer gave me a quizzical look as he examined my ID and registration. "You're Don and Fran's son, aren't you? The one who left town?" I nodded. "Why'd you come back?" "There was a 10-year reunion for my graduating class." He shook his head. "I doubt that." He looked down, then at my perplexed face. "Where exactly was this reunion?" "At the school," I said. I struggled to understand his reaction. What about my story didn't make sense? And regardless, was I about to be booked for driving 50 miles over the speed limit? Is that something they throw you in jail for? "Wait here," barked the officer. He went to his car, where he proceeded to have a long conversation over his radio. After a few minutes, he returned to me. "Get out of here, son. Don't come back down here. Don't ever do nothing like this again. You hear me?" Yeah, okay." "Then scram," he ordered. I obliged and began the long journey home. I had no idea what to make of what occurred. I can hardly find anything at all online about Copper Hill High or any of my classmates who went there, and I'm not exactly eager to reach out to any of them directly. I can't make much sense of what happened, but I am sure of one thing, that I barely made it out of that situation and that I shouldn't press my luck much further. My ankle needs some more time to heal. Once it does, I'm going to try joining a social club and making new friends. After what happened to me in Copper Hill, I decided that the past is not a place where I need to dwell any longer. 2 weeks have passed since the reunion. Today, An envelope with no return address arrived with my mail. It contained a single photograph on glossy paper with a short note written underneath. The photo featured me on the bench in the photo booth. Sitting to my side with his arm over my shoulders was Vince. He wore a blue collared shirt and looked normal. No missing skin, no bloody imprints on the surface around him. Paul crouched behind us, a dopey grin on his face. He too looked just as I'd imagined he would in his late 20s. To Paul's right, Abby, Morgan, and Michelle posed together with their arms around each other. It was a perfectly ordinary image, the exact kind of photo you'd expect to be taken at an event like that. The handwritten caption underneath read, "Although your visit was briefer than we'd preferred, we all had a splendid time catching up with you, Zach. Please feel free to come by any time. Nobody truly leaves Copper Hill, after all. Vince K., co-chair, CHHS Reunion Planning Committee." P.S., the note continued, "We are delighted that Arthur has finally joined us. Maybe you will too, at our 20th. The writing up to this point was cursive font in traditional black ink. The last few words, however, were larger in size, messily scrawled, and colored a deep shade of red. See you then, buddy, if not sooner. That was Class of 2013 by B.A. Rees. Since 2019, writer B.A. Rees has churned out dozens of stories of dark thrills and edge-of-your-seat suspense, garnering praise and attention in Reddit's nosleep horror writing community. Many of his stories have been adapted for audio by podcasts such as the No Sleep podcast and Creepy, and several have been published in written anthologies. His collection, Friends, Lovers, and Other Gaslighters, is available through Amazon. We have eaten well tonight, my friends. I gotta say, I quite like Mr. Rees's writing, and it's always nice to read about dank, empty places while in the midst of summer. That being said, the true horror here is encountering the Dutch language. My quaintly American tongue is not designed for such complexities. Thanks to B.A. Rees for tonight's tales, and thanks to all of you fine folks for joining me. Horror Hill continues next week at the same day and time, so stay tuned to this station on your internet dial. Until next time, listeners, stay spooky. You've been listening to the Horror Hill Podcast, a production of Chilling Entertainment and the creative team at Chilling Tales for Dark Nights. Tonight's episode was hosted, narrated, scored, and finalized by yours truly, Erik Peabody. Additional music by Nikki McSorley. Got a terrifying tale of your own that you'd like performed? Email it to us at submissions@simplyscarypodcast.com to have your work considered for future production. Note that any writing utilizing artificial intelligence is ineligible. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, why not help us spread our dark presence online? You can follow Chilling Tales for Dark Nights on social media, and upvote, subscribe, and hit the bell notification icon if you're listening to this on YouTube. It helps us out a lot and also keeps you up to date on new episodes. If you'd like access to uninterrupted horror, free of ads and these annoying bookend segments, might I recommend signing up to be a patron? You'll get access to hundreds of episodes of this show, as well as everything from the other programs in the Chilling Tales for Dark Nights cabal. That means all of Scary Stories Told in the Dark, Drew Blood's Dark Tales, and more. It's a veritable smorgasbord of horrific delights. Head to chillingtalesfordarknights.com to get started. If you're looking for someone to narrate or handle audio production for your own personal project, I just so happen to know a guy. Email me at erikpeabodyvoice@gmail.com, that's ErikPeabodyvoice, and we can talk details. If darkness is what you're after, listener, Your search is over. Yet, let it be known, you haven't found the darkness. The darkness has found you.
Chilling tales for dark nights.